I was sitting there like, it better not happen tonight. And boy, it did not. The UCLA women continue their great stretch to start the year, program best winning streak to start it. And now, hey, let's see what the Bruins can do. USC looming in just a couple of games.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. It's your team every day. And where we get started today, the UCLA women, number one versus a 20-1 Ohio State Buckeye squad. UCLA was trailing early, scrapped and clawed their way back in the late stages of the first quarter to take a lead, found themselves working their way through, but overall played as bad of a game as they could. And part of that is credit to Ohio State. And the other part is, at some point, you can only give so much credit to the opposition's defense, because when you turn it over 23 times as a unit, and your All-American point guard has 6 turnovers, almost accounting for close to a third of 23 turnovers. I know the math's not exactly there, but pretty close to it. 6 turnovers and a few. That's not going to win the game. Teams have figured out how bad of a team UCLA is when it comes to feeding Lauren Betts if you just put a little pressure. Ohio State figured out, hey, let's do a little full court pressure. Let's mix it up. Let us force UCLA to do a little bit better of a job to feed entry passes into the post for Lauren Betts, who it seemed like started off with this game as, a slow start after a very quiet last outing with only 6 points, but 11 assists. The numbers look a little better when it comes to her overall numbers, 19 and 14, putting herself closer into a season average of a double-double. She's not there, at least prior to the game, wasn't there rebounds-wise, but continues to put up numbers where it's like, hey, she's one of the most dominant forces in all basketball, if you can get her the basketball in time and space, which is why we've seen this shift from, in all sports, right? We see a lot less love for the running backs, a lot less love for the centers, a lot less love for such and such, right? In certain positions, and that's why we see a lot less love for some of the post players in basketball, whether it be professional, college, because the players got to give Lauren Betts the dang ball and give it to her with good touches, with her in good position so she can make a move and get to the cup. Not turning it over 23 times to get a win. Now, yes, Ohio State's a top 8 team in the country, but we can see there's a clear difference between being a top 8 team versus a top 7 team. Right now, USC sits there as a number 7 team. And I think I've read before, I forget which side it was, just kind of thinking there's about 6-7 teams who could win the national title. Right? Obviously, UCLA is right atop that list. Then you got South Carolina. You've got the Texases of the group. Notre Dame's up there. And as C's in that list, as well as the top 8, top 7, flip-flop a little bit. I had TCU in that list very early in the year. TCU has fallen from number 9, and I think they just lost this evening as well. It's a very short list of teams that can actually win the championship. There are teams who can go deep, who can probably pull an upset or two. But to beat 2 or 3 great teams in a tournament, I don't think any team can do that unless you're in the top 7. UCLA is clearly in that group, and I'm not sure if Ohio State's there. Their only loss was to Penn State, who has given teams fits. They gave UCLA fits when they played in the Walter Pyramid in one of their home games. We've seen UCLA take a longer time to adjusting a week off and playing back-to-back home games. You play Minnesota. Minnesota did their best job to throw UCLA off the rhythm, keeping Betts out of the game. Ohio State did it differently, which was, we're going to turn you over. The Bruins defensively were pretty tenacious. They didn't force as many turnovers, but they kept Ohio State under 30% from the floor. The Bruins were plus 12 in points in the paint and were able to do just enough to win this game. It was not pretty by any imagination. It is not what you would think for a number one team in the country playing at home with a little bit of rest, not too much rest, but a little bit of rest, and in a home game that last year, remember, UCLA destroyed Ohio State in Columbus in a non-conference game. They destroyed them. Now, a year later, Ohio State was game planned well enough to keep UCLA within striking distance. This was a 2-point game. UCLA won this game 65-52. Now, you look at the numbers, you see, okay, UCLA continues to beat top opponents by double figures. They do. And sometimes they've struggled. Sometimes they've put them away late. UCLA, in the last couple of games this week, have started slow early before pulling away late. There just seems to be some times where UCLA plays 20-ish minutes where they look human, and all the top 5 teams in the last few days have had games like this, but UCLA looks human, but then they just they know they're going to win. And that's what separates this team from, I think, previous Corey Close teams, previous teams in modern UCLA history, where they come in there and the game's a little tough. It's like, oh, UCLA hasn't played that game that's down to a bucket. Because when it's tight and it's close, they're going to the fourth quarter. Ohio State's making all the plays to keep it close. When they're down 8, they could have just given up. No, they fought in there. And UCLA's, all right, we're going to put our 5 out there because we had Lauren Betts resting at the end of the third. Kiki Rice was in and out of the lineup. And then all of a sudden, you blink an eye, it's a 19-1 run. Maybe 13, 16-0 at one point. You're like, this game was 2 points, a tie game just a few moments ago. And then next thing you know, UCLA's up 18 in the fourth quarter. That's how quickly the Bruins can come at you. Because when they figured out in that burst, they just poured on. And this is a game, they only scored 65. They did not shoot well. They did not play well. And they still won this game going away in the fourth quarter. They had that somewhat closer mentality. There are 2 types of closer instincts, I think, right? Those killer, Mamba-like fourth quarter instincts. You've got the, we're going to destroy you now. UCLA has that instinct where it's close and they're like, game's over. They tend to do that at some point in the second half. In every game this year, they're like, this is over. Your chances to win this game are no longer. Then there's the other type of closer mentality, which is like, when the game's within 5 points, it's a 1-score game. You've got the players, you've got the moxie to hit the late game bucket and win that game. UCLA has not been in that game this year, considering they continue to play better and better and better. And then they have some lulls, like they had these last couple of games, but then they get better as the game wears on. So it's not been a game where they're within a bucket and needing a game winner. But it is impressive. You play Baylor on a neutral court. Beat them. You play Maryland, a beat-up Maryland team on the road, and you beat them pretty easily. You play a top 10 Ohio State team, and despite playing their worst game, they still could have won this game by 15, 20 points. The game was played much tighter than that for 30 minutes, but they won that game going away, and I'm not sure them playing that game at home would have really mattered. It's impressive what UCLA's been able to do. Now, it's kind of let's talk about who are some of the heroes in this game. And here's a controversial take I'll have coming up later as well here on Locked On UCLA. You looking for tickets to the next big event? Well, there's concerts, we're in Los Angeles, there's things everywhere. The UCLA men and the women were commanding your attention, right? They have 2 top 10 teams just come through Westwood going to Pauley Pavilion. You're like, man, I missed out. Well, luckily for you, UCLA still got another big-time home game coming up on the men's side. And on the women, they still got USC coming to town later on in the year. And maybe you want to go mix in a comedy event to double dip on a Saturday. Game Time Picks has got what can help you out. With the Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you, finds the best deals. You're like, hey, even if you find a lower price somewhere else, there's a lowest price guarantee, and you'll get 110% of the difference with Game Time. If you go find a better deal elsewhere after you buy your tickets. I don't see of any other place that can do that. And your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Make your next event better by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, so this team's clearly good. They do what it takes to win games. And soon enough, they're going to have this middle trap game where they go to Eugene, an afternoon matinee affair, and then is the game everybody's in the country, I would think, has circled, right? They had South Carolina, LSU circled. They had obviously USC, UConn, they had UCLA, South Carolina. But in the conference games, you had South Carolina and LSU circled, and the two UCLA USC dates circled. Those are the games that are the separators and the teller of all for a lot of these conference games. And that's coming up soon for UCLA. So who's playing well with the USC game looming in a week's time, first in Galen Center? Well, the Bruins, in a game that did not play well, Lauren Betts came in. What'd she do? She didn't add to the turnover bug the Bruins had tonight, but 19 points on better than 50% shooting, 14 rebounds, helping UCLA. If you looked at the numbers during the Peacock broadcast, you would have seen UCLA is a team that if you don't keep them off the offensive glass, if you don't force them to turn it over, you're not going to win games because UCLA, if they're shooting well, they're unbeatable. When they miss, they get a large portion of their offensive rebounds. In this game, UCLA had 10 offensive rebounds, led to 8 second chance points. They won this game by 13. That's a big separator there. The Bruins, with the force like Lauren Betts is in the paint, when they can only score, say, 65 in a game, and they can put in 40 points in the paint, that's a good portion of offensive game time, whether getting fast break points, just feeding Betts. They can get easy buckets on a first, second, or third chance look, or even that easy bounce pass to find Betts for an easy lay-in underneath. So just having the most dominant post force in the country is a huge check mark. Then what's been impressive for UCLA, seeing the growth for Gabriela Jaquez. I know she, whatever, likes to be called Gabs. 35 minutes. Her junior year has been her blow up in her career. 17 points, couple of steals, 6 rebounds. And she's one of those sneaky good rebounders. She didn't have a lot today, but 6 rebounds for Gabby Jaquez in 35 minutes. She played the most out of any Bruin. Corey Close put her on the court, left her on the court. She shot really well from the floor, hit a 3, hit 2 of her free throws, and helped UCLA in nearly every facet. Had only 2 turnovers, and of the starters, that was amongst the fewest turnovers. Had a couple of steals, so if you go by the steals to turnovers ratio, she lost it twice and gained it back twice, and was efficient when it came to getting buckets, and is always a pretty great rebounder for those long chase down rebounds, those ones that bounce away off the rim away from Lauren Betts. You can always expect Jaquez to be in the mix. And if she's there in a tough game against a top 10 team at home and putting in 17 points, that is huge growth from her from her sophomore to her junior year. Because UCLA needed depth, right? They lost a longtime senior leader in Cam Brown. They lost Charisma Osborne, and Jaquez isn't that player. There isn't that type of player on this roster for UCLA. Charlize Ledger-Walker is injured and out for the year and waiting to play in 25-26. So there isn't that player that can come in and score 2,000 points or be second all-time in UCLA scoring. And Kiki Rice is a very special player, but you need to give Betts and Kiki Rice some help because the elite teams in this side of college basketball are very deep or very talented at their 1 and 2 positions, right? Their number 1 option, their number 2 option. You can go to Notre Dame. South Carolina is generally deep. Obviously USC, what they have. Teams have depth. And UCLA, seeing the growth in Gabriela Jaquez's career is great to see. Now, let's not forget Kiki Rice can still shoot it a little bit, 50% from the floor, 12 points. But the pressure got to her and the Bruins. And she is the engine that makes the UCLA offense run. Her going on the one-woman fast break, her ability to hit 2 of 3 threes, take over a game scoring 20 points on 7 of 9 shooting, mixing in some threes and free throws, some assists, and turnover-free basketball is what makes her an elite player. 1 of 2 or 3 great point guards in the country play at her level, right? When they were trying to do those documentaries about those stars, whether it was on Netflix or I forgot exactly what platform it was, whether it was ESPN, Netflix, whatever it is, There's a reason why they chose Kiki Rice. They understand, all right, you're going to go find a Caitlin Clark. You're going to go find these stars. But Kiki Rice was that list. That is somebody who I think should be on the short list, 1, 2, or 3, and be much higher on the National Player of the Year award list. Kiki Rice is that player that is just as important to UCLA. If she's gone, UCLA isn't going to win a national championship. Now they are very deep, and they can go to a neutral site game and beat a Louisville with a true freshman point guard because they're that good as a backup true freshman point guard. But Kiki Rice, she can't turn it over 6 times and expect UCLA to get away with a win. Not too often. You do that against USC. Remember, they played at the Galen Center last year. UCLA turned it over way too many times. Unless you get a lot of extra threes or extra shots, which weren't falling tonight, and you can't expect that to be falling in a physical game against Oregon next, or in a physical game, 1 of 2, maybe 3 or 4 against USC coming soon, you're going to have to play clean basketball. The night after the UCLA men, Mick Cronin's like, if we're only turning it over 3 times, we're cutting down the nets. Now, there have been problems earlier in the year. If UCLA has a little bit of a turnover bug, tonight reared its ugly head again. Those numbers, I'm pretty sure Corey Close is going to come out and say, hey, this is what Ohio State did. We've got to be much better at giving the ball to the interior players, a.k.a. a la Lauren Betts, to feed their best player in the paint. And just simple passes. They're just throwing it away, right? You can go look at the wire service and see the pictures of the game. You can see UCLA players throwing the ball across court. You can see UCLA going down the court in the fast break. Ohio State did well to get back in this game and deny UCLA's fast break opportunities, because there's plays where UCLA gets the ball to Betts inside, and there's just plays where Kiki Rice or any UCLA Bruin are like, hey, great outlet pass, easy layup, and that's how they usually put up 80-plus points a game without batting an eye. And Ohio State said, no, you're not going to do that. The Bruins did not hit threes in this game. And that's where maybe that's a glaring that's a big red flag for UCLA if that's something that has been figured out by Ohio State or a one game, whatever. And that sounds a little negative, and UCLA still won this game going away. That's how dominant they can be. So let's just chalk this up to a game where UCLA didn't play as well. All right, Duga Leach, in one of her not a great shooting performance, had 10 rebounds, 3 assists, and a couple of blocks. So she affects the game in more ways than her scoring. London Jones, couple of games where she's been shooting the ball well, a little bit of a cold streak. Same thing for Gardner. They weren't hitting their shots. Duga Leach took a lot of threes. She hit one that was really good in a clutch moment for UCLA, but I don't really want her shooting 4 to 5 threes a game. I'm not sure that's her game, and that's what teams would want UCLA to do. They would want Duga Leach to take 4 or 5 threes, and I think that's a win for the opposition. Now, if Jones or Gardner as shooters are taking those shots, okay. If Jaquez is taking 3 to 4, I'll live with that. But Duga Leach, while she can make them 1 or 2, if you're not making at least a 35% clip, I don't want you taking 4 or more. Those are my hot takes there. Now, again, Lena Arnasalo played 28 minutes in this game. And here's what's important. In a game where UCLA played terribly, right? They played bad and still won this game by double figures against a top 10 team. The true freshman point guard, 28 minutes off the bench, no field goals made, 5 assists, 1 turnover. Another reason why this team is extremely special. Just another reason when you can bring a true freshman in, when your All-American is struggling and getting harassed defensively, and the true freshman comes in and notices, hey, we've got an assist-to-turnover ratio that's backwards, and she was one of those positive signs for UCLA off the bench. She brought in 2 points, had a steal. That's the nice, calm presence you want coming off the bench or playing the majority of the game in this case that Arnasalo did. Janiah Barker, 9 rebounds. She was a rebounding machine, made all her shots. So the Bruins got a lot from the bench. Wasn't a lot of scoring. They only got 11 points because this wasn't a game with many points, but they got clutch play. Barker rebounded and scored at an efficient rate. Gardner hit a bucket and had 4 assists without turning it over too much. Arnasalo, same thing. So from the bench, you got 11 points. you were able to get a combined 13 rebounds and get 10 assists to 4 turnovers from players who play with the basketball a lot, right? They have the ball in their hands quite a bit. So a lot better basketball was being played by players off the bench. Now, Ohio State did make their runs when Betts wasn't on the floor, if Kiki wasn't there, but they're also the ones making some of the turnovers. Between Betts and Rice, they combined for 9 turnovers. You mentioned Dugalich. That is 13 turnovers of UCLA's 23 between those 3 players. And they touched the ball a lot. That cannot happen again, or they would be shell-shocked in Eugene. And dare I say, I'm a little worried about what would happen when they come and play USC in just a week's time. The way UCLA's played these last couple of games has me wondering, are they ready to play that game at USC? Last year, they were pretty even. I think USC was a little deeper than they are this year. The Bruins used the energy of a home crowd. London Jones was red hot from 3, and they won that game. Then SC, in the game where Lauren Betts, if I remember correctly, did not start in that game, beat UCLA in a battle back and forth at the end where USC had a big lead early and UCLA fought back late and the Bruins lost. And then they went to a Pac-12 tournament thriller in the semis, and USC used that win to boost themselves with, I think, another Stanford win into a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And that's how they were about to make the Final Four, which they didn't before they lost to UConn. UCLA, here they are. They're clear 1 seed. They've done a lot of work. They've dominated a lot of top 25 teams. But these games, the closer we've gotten towards the end of the regular season, becoming more battles in these opening quarters, regardless of if UCLA plays well early, mediocre early, great early. Teams play much better for much longer against the Bruins, and it takes another second half run. Now, there's going to be ebbs and flows, and UCLA is not going to be up by 30 for 40 minutes. They're really good, and there's a lot of pressure riding on a team that is not only wanting to do something different in their program's history. They've never won an NCAA championship. They won pre-NCAA sanctioned women's basketball championships, which the last time they had won more than 20 plus games in a row to start a year, they won the national championship. Now UCLA is having that similar type of success this year. They have a very special team. Then the night where they play bad, they can still knock you out by outscoring you by 18 points in like two minutes in the blink of an eye, and they're putting away a top 10 team like, all right, we were just toying with you for 30 minutes and we'll still beat you down. And they could possibly get away with that in Eugene. I would say let's not toy with the fact that Oregon is still scrappy with their 16-6 record, I think, on the women's side, and then they're going to play them in Eugene and Matthew Knight. Okay, that's a quick trip to Eugene and back, but you can't do that against USC, who I wasn't impressed with seeing them early, but you have a superstar like Juju. You bring in the pieces like they did in the offseason with Lindsey Gottlieb. They can game plan in front of an excited home crowd, the most energized, revved up crowd UCLA will see this year on the road outside of a couple of Big Ten atmospheres. And if UCLA plays this bad, they will lose. And I'm almost leaning on this, kind of glass half empty. You play like this, a weird, awkward start, and Juju's getting calls at home and shooting 15 free throws, which he did last year against UCLA, by the way. The Bruins could drop their first game of the year at USC, and it could be the reverse of last year, where the Bruins then hold serve at home and then potentially beat them in a Big Ten tournament, and that's what gives UCLA the upper hand in late season March seeding. The Bruins are clearly the best team, but they're trying to get this pressure off their shoulders where they somewhat have underperformed later in seasons against better teams with Corey Close, all right? With talented teams, they haven't gone to a Final Four, let alone win a national championship. They're trying to get to a Final Four in the NCAA era. Corey Close is the all-time winningest head coach in program history, but she needs to get the group going. And she has done a lot of things. Talk about playing to a standard, playing with the character. That all her quotes that she brings in is always filled with quotes, right? We're blessed to have 2 coaches who are filled with lots of quotes between Mick Cronin and Corey Close, all right? Because that's not what we get with Deshaun Foster. I believe this team will have closer to 11 turnovers when they play Oregon. It'll be cleaned up. She'll get after them in practice, and we'll see a much better performance against Oregon. But there are some slight concerns with a huge matchup. Now, the one positive, the huge positive, that is showcased UCLA be the best team in the country, when the game they wanted to win at the time in November came up, South Carolina came to Poly, the Bruins showed up and did not bat an eye and destroyed the Gamecocks and sent them back to Columbia packing in dominant fashion. No, South Carolina's played much better and very different since that game in early mid-November. And the Bruins have this tendency to say, hey, when we wake up and we really want it and we play for 30 to 40 minutes, they could put away any team and beat them by double figures, which is scary. But they can't just rely on, okay, we're cold, we're playing bad, because at some point, that story's going to get old and they're going to drop a game, which is possible. They don't need to go undefeated to prove they're the best team by a decent margin. A tough loss on the road is okay as long as they learn the lessons and they don't let it happen again and they go on a deep run the NCAA tournament. Now, the growth of Gabby Jaquez proves that they're very deep. The composure of a true freshman in a very physical Big Ten game looms large. Lauren Betts, after a slow game last time out against Minnesota, 19-14, and it seemed like it was a quiet night. Kiki Rice still put up 12 and 4 and a couple of rebounds with two steals, affecting the game in all aspects of the floor. Barker showcased why she's one of the most impactful transfers UCLA got, rebounding, playing some defense, and getting some tough buckets. That is how deep the Bruins are. They can go 8 to 9 deep, and no other team can go as deep as the Bruins are. When next year they're going to get Lauren Betts' little sister, they're going to get Ledger Walker. That's the expectation. Bring 95% of these players back in terms of eligibility outside of Dugalich, and this team could be even better. And if they don't lose this year, I don't even think they'd lose next year. But I do think that potential loss is coming up pretty soon if they don't clean up this turnover act. It hasn't been recently that it was this bad, but you certainly can't do that against some really good teams that you're going to face multiple times. In the Big Ten, the women's side, they only face one team twice in the regular season. That's USC. They don't go play Oregon and Washington 2 times, home and home. No, they play USC twice. And that is the best team outside of UCLA in this conference. Best team. Besides USC's loss against Iowa and the Caitlin Clark Cello. All right. So the Bruins have to play well when they go to Galen Center and when they host them in the regular season finale at Pauley Pavilion. We'll learn a lot about this team's moxie. It's unfortunate that they couldn't have those games in early January and build off that. It'll still be fun nonetheless. That the number 1 team in the country can play a top 10 team, toy with them for 30 minutes in their worst game and still put them away like nothing ever happened. Which is what makes this team pretty special. All right. They're the number 1 team in the country. They're undefeated. Yeah. Nuts. Absolutely nuts. Let's get our hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA. Fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.